Chris, Mark, Matthew, welcome, my friends. It is really great to have you on our virtual stage in VShield. It is an honor. Thank you very much. So I don't want to waste time because I have so many questions for you. I'm just jumping into my questions for that reason. COVID-19 is all around, we know it. So, but in terms of security, is it a turning point for security in terms of the good guys and the bad guys? What do you think?
Well, let me jump in first. I don't know if it's a turning point so much as it's just an event. By just an event, what I mean is that we will have people who've been working from home. We'll have people who travel or do not travel. We will have people who are disgruntled employees. What I think the shift may be, however, is that if we find that the workforce changes as a result of profitability loss, results in companies looking at their security function as a cost center, at which point they say, you know, you got all these cybersecurity guys and these red teamers and things like that. We're cutting those jobs, they're gone. The difficulty there is you're now you're releasing a lot of raw talent into the market, and there's no guarantee that they're going to stay on the good side. You know, they might go over to the dark side, at which point the threat level is going to increase. So a lot depends upon the intensity and duration of the COVID-19 that is going to potentially shift some of the workforce into the threat side, which otherwise are being made happy by regular paychecks and decent coffee brews at work and things such as that.
Yeah, I hope we are more clever than that. Any other add-on, guys?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a stab at this one just for a second from a slightly different view. I think for a lot of us in the industry, it's almost an I told you so moment. You know, we've been talking for so long about incident response planning, disaster recovery planning. We've sat down and we've gone like, hey, let's actually test this theory out. Let's actually close the building down. Let's put people remote. Let's do all these different things. And organizations haven't necessarily always listened. I mean, definitely some have, but a lot haven't. And so now it's forced upon us. We've all of a sudden, you know, in so many cases had to scramble on both the good side of the fence to get everybody up and running and everything else, but also on the other side of the fence, which is now we have a workforce that's scattered to the winds. And it's like, okay, well, you know, is endpoint actually doing what it needs to? Yeah, probably not. Is this doing what it needs to? Yeah, probably not. So how do we start compensating more effectively? So, you know, there's definitely a huge push in the how do we get our eyes into the systems? How do we actually understand what is going on? You know, there is definitely a push to the back to the basics, so much more on the education. From an adversarial perspective, I mean, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. So from our side of things, it's like, okay, how do we rapidly ramp up a distributed workforce and train them and get them tested and everything else? So yeah, it's been a bit of an I told you so moment.
In really, the compute landscape has shifted in significant ways with so much of the workforce going remote. And again, it's just a change in operations, and you don't have the normal physical controls or the social controls that normally exist within an office. And because of that, the battlefield tactics, if you will, have also changed. The attackers can now move to different interfaces and services and solutions that weren't heavily used before and certainly weren't vetted from a security perspective. That gives them a window of opportunity until we see the impact, and security can then respond to it. So it's really an opportunity for the attackers to go after kind of the underbelly for some of the tools and services and people out there.
You know, I will start to say remote 19 instead of COVID-19, guys. It's a big concern for sure, and we were not ready for that. Do you have a checklist? Can you give some, you know, good advices over here, a checklist of what to do for securing the remote workforce?
You know, the basics that we've held to during normal working environments still apply. We need to make sure that the workers that are at home and they feel that they're in a safe environment. Well, sure, I'm going to use a USB drive here. This is my home. I'm safe. Sure, I'm going to click on these things. We just have to reinforce that those good practices that we teach in the office, they still apply, even more so to when you're at home, you know, in a comfort zone. We can't abandon that. We have to maintain that vigilance.
What about the inside the threat, guys? I mean, is that an increased risk?
I think it's always been a risk. Yeah, I think it's always been a risk, and I think that's maybe the difference is, you know, to the earlier point is, it doesn't feel like there's somebody looking over your shoulder as much. So is the potential there to maybe mess around a little bit more? Absolutely, no two ways about it. But I think that's where, you know, the basics, the tools and the technologies that we are putting in place, you know, to the earlier point, if we don't have that stuff in place at the moment, after what, 8 weeks of this, then it's too late. You know, just basically pack up and have a nice day. I think there's the potential definitely for more, but we're seeing more from the adversarial side than we're seeing more from the insider side at the moment.
Many companies that I'm talking to are talking about zero trust, implementing zero trust. Is zero trust a buzzword, or is it something implementable, guys? What do you think?
Could I take it out and shoot it? I mean, seriously, right next to AI, ML, and all the other crap that we've been trying to peddle for the last couple of years. I think the concept of reducing the trust surface, I mean, at the moment, unfortunately, you walk into an environment and half the users are local admins on their machines. Nobody's really got a full clue as to what's going on with their Active Directory. I mean, that's obviously one of the biggest attack surfaces out there, and. So the concept of ratcheting down and saying, look, you should only have access to what you need to at the time you need to have access is great. But so many organizations don't even know what they have, where it is, or how to deal with it, that even just getting that basic layer under control before you even start to ratchet the controls down. And by the way, what you know today changes tomorrow. So good luck with that.
I agree. I agree.
Other two, what do you guys think about it now that I've just shot it in the head?
Well, Mark, go ahead.
Okay, so
I'm
go back and look at
after this answer, it is not
Mark,
easy to speak.
please be reasonable before I jump in.
right.
How can I say it's a great
before we
thing?
get going.
Yeah.
So you look at Kinderbog's paper back in 2010 from Forrester, where he's talking about zero trust. And in that model, he's basically say, trust no one. And you authenticate and encrypt all communications. Well, in a very high security environment, if you're maybe not like the CIA or something like that, that might make sense. But in a corporate environment, is that really an overkill? That assumes essentially that you are operating on an utterly insecure network. At any point in time, somebody could inject traffic and then be believed, or they could sample traffic by decrypting it. Now, let's look at their current we're on the road workforce. When someone is connecting in, if they're on a VPN, the VPN is going to do TLS encryption, most likely, it might be SSL or whatever, it's probably TLS or IPsec. That encryption protocol is well worked out. It's going to be really tough to go ahead and be a man in the middle. If you don't have a cert, you're not trusted by the home base, you can't log in, and so that's not going to happen. And so now what we say is that our network, although it's extended for a significant distance from the home office to all the people working at home, is really still an extension of that internal network trust. Your bigger threat is going to be people operating on unapproved devices, the same ones that their kids use to go ahead and play games on, or family members screw around on this home Wi-Fi network or the like. And that's going to be your source of your threat, not the internal portion, but somebody basically getting in over your shoulder. And if we don't keep things up to date and we don't have good endpoint security protection, what's going to happen is essentially someone's going to be looking over your shoulder electronically, doing everything you do as you go into your network, whether or not it's zero trust or not. So your attack surface for your COVID-19 network is similar to your attack surface for a zero trust network. It's over your shoulder and where you're accessing. It's not the stuff inside.
How good are we with them? I mean, Chris, I know you will start with don't click shit. So what are they, man?
I've changed it because you're right. But the problem is you can't stop people. I was talking to somebody the other day about this one, and I'm like, look, click responsibly. Because we just can't stop. And we ourselves send out more and more crap for people to click. We do it with training. I mean, it's like end user training. Here, just click here to log in. It's like, you're killing me. So the logic then turns. It's like, okay, how do I educate the people? How do I actually help? I mean, you got two options. We either educate humans or you take them out of the equation. Some days I want to take them out of the equation. Occasionally, we probably have to live with them for a while. So let's educate them. So it does come down to that. It's responsible clicking, which comes back to people, process, and then let's talk about technology. So for me, that's a lot of it. Is like the basics. I mean, we can go through a whole bunch of them, and the other guys can definitely. But for me, it comes back to people, then process, and then let's worry about technology afterwards.
100% agreed. Matthew, Mark.
Yeah, I agree. I think for the longest time, we've put too much emphasis strictly on technology controls, and we've ignored, the biggest weakness, right? The wetware, the people. And you have to have, it's two sides of a coin. You've got technology and you've got the behavioral aspects. In between, there's that process. We have to address it all.
Yeah,
and right now, the weakest point is the web.
Yeah, and I concur. I'm down here in Florida in the U.S. and one town over, a gentleman by the name Stu Showerman has a company called KnowBe4. Well, this past year he's now passed $1 billion in valuation for privately held company. Okay, that's your unicorn.
Sounds good.
And when I talked to Stu, I go over and visit him. He said it's still wide open because we look at things such as, I will teach at the SANS Institute, and there's thousands of people who want to learn something about security. But when it comes to security awareness, there's tens of millions of people who access computers that need to learn that. And that is a fantastically huge target market. So what I tell people, and I ask them the question is, how many people in your organization can screw things up with a computer? And the answer is just about everyone. And there's a second question. How many of those people work for you? And to a large extent, few or none. And therefore, for us as security professionals, our challenge isn't so much being brilliant at technical stuff, but it's being able to influence people, not because we have authority over them, but because we can influence them because we built some sort of trust relationship. When G. Mark says, or Chris says, don't click here, but it's dancing bears, they want to look, but wait, Chris said don't do it, and I trust Chris, so maybe I shouldn't. When you get to that level where people do what you ask them to do, not because you're ordering them to, but they get it, that you're protecting them. You're like kids, like don't play in traffic or something like that. We're really sort of being the parents here, but we can't come across as a parent because adult to adult, that just doesn't work.
Yes, give them the responsibility, but still keep track of them, right? Have the visibility.
I'd rather have a security savvy workforce than a stack of firewalls. It really makes a difference because it can undermine all your technical controls.
I think it's G-Mark. I mean, you said it perfectly. And this is, you've got the folks over at Noble4. I'm hanging out with Gabrielle and the crew over at Wiser, and it's what I love about it is it's all about collaboration. It's the same thing. It's communication and collaboration. And for them, they've taken almost the American mentality. Let me give you a 30, 60, 90-second soundbite. And it's like, it's just short, sweet, and often. It's not the once a year to pass the audit. It's like, let's have a bit of fun this week. Let's try and train you on something else. And you just keep doing that reinforcement. And I don't care who it is, I don't care. We're all trying to do the same thing. It's how do we communicate and collaborate effectively with the very people on the front line, to Matt's point.
And to extend on that, one thing you want to make sure is don't become the enemy. You don't want to be the boogeyman who's out there issuing reprimands and putting people on report. What you want is for the most people, if they click on a phishing link, they get it wrong, they see this little pop-up that goes, nya, that face palm that they give themselves is probably sufficient punishment because people will self-correct. Now, at that point, if month after month after month, the same person keeps clicking on the phishing links, maybe then you have to have a conversation. There are jobs around here that don't involve computers, and maybe you should have one, like cleaning the toilets or something like that. But otherwise, most people screw up once. It's like, yeah, let it go, because they'll self-correct from it, and then they kind of view it as almost as a game, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, we move from the traffic cop to that trusted advisor. That's really what we want to help them mature, because you're not always going to be there to look over their shoulder, nor should you. Again, making them security savvy and empowering them makes the entire organization stronger, and it creates a social bond of reinforcement among employees as well. So definitely have to move to that trusted advisor kind of role.
I have another big topic on my list, guys, which is privacy. So shields in communication, data encryption. There is another angle, when in the San Bernardino attack, when Apple refused the FBI to help them, I said, Apple 1, FBI 0. But then through the help of an Israeli company, they found the vulnerability in iPhone and they handled the problem, exploited the vulnerability, but they didn't disclose it first to Apple. So it is another angle, but is this ethical, guys? I mean, there is a responsible approach. There has to be a responsible approach with the vulnerabilities. And I'm looking also at the bug bounty programs. Are they there to buy the silence of the researchers? I mean, the critics say like that. What is your comment on this topic?
I personally am a huge fan of bug bounty programs. And it brings in a tremendous community of brilliant people that have other types of skills to help test and identify weaknesses in products and services. And there's an economic benefit as well. Prior to the bug bounty programs, if you were a vulnerability researcher and you discovered something, right, there was no financial incentive to report it responsibly. And so a lot of people kind of went where the money was and would sell it on the black market and for malicious purposes. Now there's an entirely different avenue. And again, it may not be as much money, but you've got ethical researchers, white hat, we've got, people on the bridge here that now can take advantage and get a financial reward. It may be less, but they can follow their ethos and actually help secure technologies and products. And through, ethical and responsible reporting, it is a benefit of not only to the technology companies, but their customers and users.
And so I think it changes the attitudes of some of these companies that in the past, if you called them up and said, hey, I'm a security researcher, I found a vulnerability, they're like, we're calling law enforcement, you're a crook, we're going to have you arrested. It's like, no, I'm on your side, I'm trying to help you. No. And so as a result, I mean, Chris, you could probably speak better to this than anybody else on this panel.
Yeah, I got a bunch of cease and desist letters and some, pretty interesting marks around my cuffs occasionally. Here's one other angle for this one, and this goes kind of back to the Apple discussion. So the reason the FBI did not get what they wanted from Apple is because there is an argument, shall we say, that other intelligence agencies in foreign and domestic already had plenty of other accesses into it. The difference is they're using it for either intelligence, information gathering, or quite honestly, saving people. If it gets handed over to the FBI and used in a prosecution case, then that becomes discoverable information. If I'm trying to maintain a tactical advantage over you, I'm not going to tell you what I have insofar as what kind of methods and capabilities I have. We run into it now. I mean, I run around with an Apple iPhone. I am very well aware of a number of exploits that are out there that Apple has no clue about at the moment. So given that, the uses for those is obviously to gather information, gather intelligence, and use it to build intelligence, and then potentially use it to save lives. And that's that double-edged sword when it comes to privacy and information. If I can gather more and more information and actually save lives, there's an argument to say there's a good reason for doing that. The challenge then becomes one if I use that for other purposes, for persecution, segregation, and all those other things. That's when it gets into the really nasty side of the world. Personally, to the other point, I love bug bounties. I've got, a third of my whiskey collection is probably because of bug bounties. So, yeah.
There is always the good use and the bad use, right?
Exactly.
You brought up an interesting kind of bringing some of these topics together. So we talked about a 1984 an Orwellian society. And yet the issue is with respect to governments like federal law enforcement to say, hey, our legal system today requires us to go ahead and make things available for discovery to the other side, who then basically say, well, we're going to suppress this evidence, not because it's the right thing to do, but we're going to actually go ahead and get you to suppress it yourself, because otherwise we're going to just publish it to the world and we're not going to respect any of that. Yeah. As a result, what happens then is you have your public availability and then the unpublic thing. I mean, you look at, was it CVE 2020-0601, which was the vulnerability within the crypto library on your Windows systems that was disclosed by the United States National Security Agency, which could be a whole conversation in itself. Is that they decided to just go straight, and they decide that maybe they've exploited this as far as they can, or they said, you know what, it's being used against us more than we're using it somebody else, so we better go ahead and blow them out in the water. That would be an interesting thing to explore, but I don't think we'll ever see the answer.
Yeah, I agree.
We have the same thing in the physical world. I mean, you go back to the physical world, Skunkworks, Lockheed Martin Skunkworks program. We were flying, and we are still flying, all sorts of interesting stuff around that isn't discoverable for 10, 20 years. And it isn't discoverable because a small amount of people know about it. It's well kept secret, and we do the best we can to use it for the advantages that we need to. When somebody eventually photographs a stupid thing on a bloody runway, well, then, you know, hey, look, we've got a new toy to play with. You just don't tell them we've been playing with it for the last 20 years.
So when it comes to the vulnerabilities, most probably the top of the game is IoTs, right? I had an interview with Bruce Schneier. He's highly concerned. He calls it Internet Plus, and he's highly concerned about people's lives because of the poor quality software. Chris, my friend, what is going on with the cars, ships, airplanes? Is there any progress over there?
Oh, you know, no, let's just put it that way. There's a lot of people going, hey, we need to do something. Cars, actually, I'll take that back. Cars, definitely. You know, I have a love-hate with Tesla. You know, I mean, to me, it's a freaking overpriced milk float, let's be perfectly honest. And so, but I love the fact that they got out in front of the security community and said, here's our vehicle, beat the crap out of it. The same, I will also give some kudos to like GM, Mercedes, and a couple of the others. They've done that, but a lot of the others are like, well, no, we'll figure it out. Shipping got its ass handed to it with Maersk and a couple of other breaches, and some of them have actually woken up and gone, hey, we have a problem. So they're starting to look at it. Planes are still planes. I mean, they're still a mess. Trains, we've been having some fun with trains for the past couple of years, and yeah, that's another shit show.
So vulnerable even today. I mean, with the ransomware attacks and such stuff. And what is going to happen when they get even more smarter? They're not smart enough yet, but they will be, right? What is going to happen then, today and tomorrow? Comment, please.
Here's a thought, is your cities are not on the ball because it's not their money. So when you look at something like the city of Baltimore in the United States or Atlanta, who are asked to pay, let's say, a $500,000 ransom, but instead spend $31 million saying we're not going to pay the ransom, that's not coming out of their pockets. They're not shareholders that are going ahead and looking at their net worth dropping. They're like, yeah, I got elected to this job. If you don't reelect me, I'll go do something else. And so it's the accountability issue, in my opinion, is that the politicians who are running it are not selected on merit. They're not selected on intelligence. They're not selected on wisdom. They're selected on campaign effectiveness. And as a result, it'll always be broken in that area, which then calls into question, does that bring in an entire new layer of regulations on top of cities to have to comply with this? And as we move maybe more and more toward a control environment, I don't know. What do you guys think?
I would disagree a little bit, right? Because I think there's a natural tension in the system. The government agencies at the local and even at the state, you know, haven't invested very much in security. They never really prioritized it. And we've seen this before. We've seen it in finance 2 decades ago. We saw it in healthcare, you know, the past few years. We're seeing it in the legal field. And, you know, it goes back to the axiom, right? Security isn't relevant until it fails. Well, now it's starting to fail, and they're starting to feel the pain, and politicians don't like public embarrassment. So I think you're going to see, you know, to your point, the politicians, they're probably going to be changing their campaigns during the next re-election. They are going to start talking about security in places like Baltimore and Atlanta, right? Because they want to be able to differentiate themselves and go, hey, it's not going to happen on my watch if you elect me. And that's the natural, you know, tension in the system to now, okay, we're going to pay attention to this. We're going to invest. It's now important because we felt the pain. But again, it's going to take time.
Hey, man, somebody finally disagreed with the other. I was thinking that you called each other from my back and agreed on everything. I loved it. Please disagree to some level.
Well, I disagree with that statement. I think we actually all.
So what about the nation states, guys? I mean, do you think that the cyber Cold War is going to intensify, and are they taking the nation state attackers, taking advantage of the pandemic? What is going on over there?
When it comes to digital warfare, every country can have chips at the table, as it were. It's really not that expensive compared to, you know, traditional kinetic warfare. And so this becomes another political tool, just like as armies are a political tool, right, to push a political agenda. This becomes another very viable tool for every country on the planet, right? You don't have to have a warm water port. You don't have to have massive airfields or troops or soldiers or tanks. It's very, very effective. Heck, you can even outsource it. And so is now a potential threat. And then they also have to do the reverse. They have to protect themselves from every other country as well. So this is a new arms race. It's just quiet. You don't see the satellite photos. You don't see the armies amassing. And so it's stealthy, but let's not kid ourselves. There absolutely is an arms race.
What about
Here's
the
another way of looking at
non-domestic?
it.
Yeah, please go on.
Here's another way of looking at it. Sorry, I always have this. With this, I can influence one person. Let's face it, or 7 or 8 people at once. Okay. With this, I can take down a government, and that's the difference.
What about the non-domestic hardware and software having the backdoors implemented by the intelligence agencies of those countries? I mean, this is a huge risk, but nobody believes that we can survive without using those products or software. Nobody can do it alone. So what do you think of that?
Hardware and firmware security, it's been ignored for, forever for the most part. And it's really only in the past couple of years that we've looked at it. Supply chain security is always an issue. It has always been an issue. Personally, I'm more concerned about the inherent vulnerabilities that exist that can be leveraged versus a government taking the effort to try and go and put one in. Economically, it's just easier to take advantage of the ones that are already there because of poor design and poor coding. Now, once that it raises to a level and there's a tipping point, then yeah, I think governments may move to put backdoors in. But again, it's very costly, very timely, time intensive. It's tough to do and do well. And you need so much effort and cooperation to really make it happen. So I think the bigger problem here is the undisclosed and unknown vulnerabilities that are just part of the hardware that's out there.
Well, here's what I think would be a recipe for doing so. Let's assume that you have a desire to insert some type of equipment in a political opponent. Yet you have to come in through the front commercial door, which means if you propose a 5G system and you're going to say, well, show us all your code, you got a choice. I can either embed into the hardware or the software my naughty things, or I'm going to ship a completely benign system, at which point it gets torn apart, looked at it and said, yep, nothing here. And then revision 1 comes out and everybody tears it apart and looks at it, well, nothing there. After a while, you're going to get vigilance fatigue. And over time, at version 7, 8, 9, or 10, you're not going to put all the payload in at once. It's going to be a binary or trinary where here's a little bit of code and that doesn't do a whole lot. Here's a little. When you add them all together, all of a sudden, they all string together. And at that point, people stop looking for it. And so I think if you're up against an opponent who has demonstrated a patience that is able to go ahead and sustain that. And that's why I think you see when you're looking at these nation states, can we keep some companies from other countries from being successful or using it? And those countries are then saying, well, we're not putting anything in it, but oh, by the way, we'll put a national level effort to make sure that they can get the chips and the resources to keep going. It makes you wonder, there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance going in there, and it waits to see, but we're not going to see this in round 1 or round 2, but it's going to be version 6, 7, or 8, and all of a sudden, boom, it's there. Because no one
it's the long game.
So coming to 5G, guys, I mean, you said 5G, G-Mark. What do you think about that? 5G was even accused of spreading COVID-19, right? So, Chris, what do you think, my friend? What is going on with 5G?
I love the conspiracy theories. I think it's fantastic. I mean, I love the concept that apparently, between the chemtrails and 5G, we're spreading COVID. And by the way, we can turn it on and off with 5G because, it's coming out of China and everything else. And, it's a biological warfare. And I mean, we'll get there. Don't get me wrong. The conspiracy theory folks are right. But they're about 10, 15, 20 years, a little bit too early on that one, I'm afraid. I think 5G is fantastic, but I also think that it's got to come, especially to G-Mark's point, it comes with its own set of challenges. The fact that we can actually put processing closer and closer to the edge, and the fact that we can have the interoperability between technologies, I think is an absolutely amazing thing. But first and foremost, we have 20 to 26 billion devices, of which about 25 billion of the bloody things are insecure, running around the place that we're now going to connect even more successfully. By the way, including embedded human stuff, that's going to get really interesting. And we're doing it potentially on a technology, to G-Mark's point, that is maybe 1 or 2 generations away from somebody starting to be able to use to their advantage.
So guys, my last questions. Next 5 years, what do you think we are gonna talk, the most important topics in security?
The stuff I'm working on, and the stuff I think is going to be the future, is it's kind of a combination of what we're doing with embedded technology inside humans and the challenges that we are seeing with that. And I'm really looking forward to the ransomware that goes after humans. When you get an email in your inbox saying, "Hi, I know you have a heart implant. If you want it to carry on working, send me $1,000. Loves, hugs, and kisses." And that. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
The next 5 years, I think it all centers around the rapid growth of our digital world, right? 1 million, new users join, the internet every year. We've got massive numbers of devices and services and applications and innovation going crazy. And especially in the IoT and IoT, think smart cars and autonomous vehicles, we're introducing life safety issues, right? Whether it be the devices in the hospital or implanted or your autonomous vehicle, right? And the more we rely on it, the more it controls potentially life safety. It's going to push a rise in cyber criminals, right? That ransomware, whether it's to keep your pacemaker going, or you get in your autonomous car and do you really want to go home today? Well, if you do, send me this money. And so, you've got, then you have to worry about the privacy of all this massive amounts of data that's being generated. Autonomous cars can create up to 4 terabytes of data per day, per car, right? The amount of data and trying to protect that. And then, because over 90% of the data that's even gathered today isn't usable, it's not even formatted, it's unstructured. You've got AI systems in the next 5 years that actually will be able to go in there and mine that data and be able to be used for both good and bad. New arms race in the cybersecurity field for both sides. And then finally, we're not going to have enough cybersecurity talent to be able to address all these issues. So that's the 5 years, 5 things that I think we're going to be talking about.
Oh man, we're gonna talk about bad things. Guys, your last messages to your friends in Turkey before I say bye to you.
Thank you for having us. For me, thank you very much.
Thank you for the privilege. Looking forward to get a chance to get out there in person.
Exactly, man. I would love that.
Same thing. I'm going to echo that one. I have ridiculously fond memories of being out there last time. I really wish we could be out there now, but loves, hugs, stay safe, stay healthy, tuck and roll to everybody over there. It was freaking fantastic being there. Look forward to being there again.
Thank you, guys. It was great to